Hi, everybody. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Oh, I love you guys so much.
We know.
Today's Valentine's Day. Yeah, we love you guys out there. And today we have an article for you to celebrate February 14th, Valentine's Day. Mail delivery from pigeons to planes.
中文标题是飞跃吧信件，航空信件首次投递成功。
Okay, so I'll read through the whole article first, and then we'll go back, as we always do, sentence by sentence, in English and Chinese for you. There was a time when the best way to send a letter was by pigeon. Of course, these letters couldn't be very long because pigeons were only able to carry tiny pieces of paper. Sometimes the pigeons successfully reached the destination, while at other times they got lost or died on the way. Later, horses and hot air balloons were used, but each of these had its own disadvantages too. Luckily, today we have airmail. On February 18th, 1911, the first airmail flight in history was made. On that day, Frenchman Henri Piquet took off from Allahabad, India, in a small airplane. The flight was part of an industrial exhibition in the city. Anyone could send a letter to England on the flight for a fee. In the end, 6,500 pieces of mail were accepted. It amounted to 90 kilograms, quite a lot for the small plane. All the money obtained from the event was donated to the Oxford and Cambridge Boys' Hostel. The plane only flew 6 miles and landed on the other side of a river. From there, the mail made the rest of the journey to England in the normal way, by land and sea. Each piece of the airmail had a stamp that said, First Aerial Post. In fact, King George V was one of the recipients. Even though the first airmail flight hardly saved any time on the mail's delivery, it proved that sending mail by air was possible. As airplane technology improved over the decades, airmail has become more efficient.
So, I'm going to airmail my Valentine to you by folding it up into a paper plane and sending it across the room. I hope that qualifies. Anyways, there was a time when the best way to send a letter was by pigeon, because pigeons have this famous capacity of always knowing where their home is. So in order to send a letter by pigeon, you had to take a pigeon from the place you wanted to send it to. And so if you only had 3 pigeons from, say, Bruce's home, you only had 3 chances to send the man a letter. It was not a very simple system. It was pretty complicated.
Yeah, 好，所以呢，这其实靠鸽子寄信是有一点蛮复杂的，没有我们想象中那么容易啦，哈。但是这个第一句话他说 There was a time when 英文里面讲故事或者是开头文章开头常常会这样讲，就是曾经有一段时间是这样子的，好，说有那么一个时候事情是这样子的，所以曾经有一段时间呢 The best way to do something was by 怎么样？那各位也是一样把它学起来。The best way to do something is by 后面可能是个名词可能是个动名词 by 什么。那在这里呢，他是说你要 send a letter， 你要寄一封信最好的方法就是 by pigeon， 就是透过鸽子。I have a question. Can we say by pigeons?
No, because we're talking about the category. So pigeon is not the group of pigeons. It is a single pigeon representing the category of pigeon.
Yeah, so we say by rail, by ship, not by ships.
好，所以各位注意到这个地方呢，我们不能讲 by pigeons， 不能加 s， 因为这个地方呢，它是一个类别by pigeon， 就好像我们讲说 by ship 就是用船来运送或怎么样，这个时候后面不会讲 by ships， 不加 s 的。那你也可以说这个地方的 pigeon 就是一个概念而已，一个抽象的概念，它不是指哪一只鸽子，也不是指一只一只的鸽子，所以各位注意这个地方不能讲 by pigeons， 是 by pigeon， 注意就跟 by ship 是一样的道理。
Of course, these letters couldn't be very long because pigeons were only able to carry tiny pieces of paper. And here in Taiwan, there are still quite a few places, one just a few hundred meters from my apartment. They're up on the top floor, and every day in the afternoon, I don't know about the morning, but in the afternoon, the man who is raising the pigeons lets them fly around and around and around for about 30 minutes.
They do need their exercise.
Yeah. We don't have many homes out there. 我们在海边, and it's lots of trees. It's a pretty rural area, actually, where I live. Anyway, a pigeon is pretty strong. It can fly a very long distance, but if it's carrying the Encyclopedia Britannica, it's not going to get very far.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're not very large birds.
Yeah, no, I mean. 好，所以这个鸽子呢，他们虽然说蛮厉害的，可以飞很远哈，但他们其实当然不可能带太重的东西啊，就飞不起来了。你只要带个百科全书，那是不可能的。他们本身也没有很大只。好，所以用这个句讲到说 ，of course， 就是不用说，当然 ，these letters 这些信呢 ，couldn't be very long， 不能写太长啊，不能好几页。为什么呢？因为 pigeons were only able to， 他们也只能够 carry 携带 tiny， 就是很小的 pieces of paper 啊，就一些小小的几张纸而已啊，太多也不行。
Now, sometimes the pigeons successfully reached their destination. So sometimes they got there successfully, while at other times they got lost or died on the way, like there was a hawk. So you were never sure that your pigeon message would go through.
好，所以呢 sometimes 有的时候呢，鸽子们呢成功地 successfully reached 到达 the destination 到达他们的目的地。然后呢 while at other times 这个 sometimes 就是相对于这里的 at other times 就有的时候他们成功了，但是呢在其他的时候 at other times 那两个之间有对比，所以用一个 while 在那边哈。所以虽然说有的时候有些鸽子会成功到达目的地，但同时另外一方面在其他的时候呢 they got lost 他们会迷路，或者是 died 会死亡 on the way 在路上。
Later, horses and hot air balloons were used, but each of these had its own disadvantages too. Well, horse, as we all know, can carry a lot more than a pigeon, but it can only stay on the land. A pigeon can go over mountains, but it takes much, much, much longer for a horse. A hot air balloon, they are not the most trusty things to travel in or use for carrying objects. They have their problems as well. So pigeons continued to be used, but there were other ways to send mail as time went by.
Can I tell a quick anecdote about how badly hot air balloons can go awry? During the French Revolution, Paris was in lockdown, and some revolutionaries in Paris decided to use a hot air balloon to communicate with people outside the city that they couldn't get through because soldiers were blocking their way. So they put two guys up in a hot air balloon that got caught in a windstorm, and by the time they were able to set down, they were in Sweden. And so, which is pretty far away from Paris. But fortunately, the Swedish government or king at the time was like sympathetic to their cause, and also a lot of people in Sweden were. So the messengers came back with a whole bunch of money and supplies that they wouldn't have otherwise had. On the other hand, the message was not delivered in a timely fashion.
所以这个Angel 老师讲说呢，这个热气球哈，它实在是不可信任哈。例如说在法国大革命的时候啊，这个在巴黎有一些人呢，他们决定派两个人啊乘坐热气球啊去求援，结果呢后来热气球降落的时候，他们到了这个瑞典，所以差蛮远的哈。虽然说后来他们还是有得到援助哈，但是这个实在是蛮夸张的。好，所以呢这个地方讲到说 later 就是后来，那个马跟这个热气球呢被用来 were used 就是被用来送信，但是呢 each of these 就是马跟热气球每一个他们每一项都是怎么样呢 had its own disadvantages 也有他们自己的 disadvantages 缺点，所以都不理想啊。你一开始用鸽子也不好，后来用马也不好，它有它的缺点，用热气球也有它的缺点。
So luckily today we have airmail, which is a little bit more dependable than hot air balloon mail.
好，那 luckily 就是 fortunately 好 by good luck 很幸运的呢，今天我们有 airmail 就是航空邮递。
On February 18th, 1911, the first airmail flight in history was made. In case you were wondering, well, when did airmail by plane begin? There it is, February 18th, 1911.
好，所以呢，在1911年2月18日，第一个 airmail flight 就是航空邮递的飞行 flight。那 in history 就是在历史上第一次的航空邮递的飞行 was made。好，这个 made 的受词是那个 flight， 所以他们第一次成功的或者是成功做了航空邮递的飞行，在历史上。
On that day, the day that history was made, Frenchman Henry Piquet took off from Allahabad, India, in a small airplane. How did you pronounce this dude's name? Piquet?
The Frenchman?
Yeah.
I said Henri Piquet.
Henri Piquet. He took off from Allahabad, India. If you take off from somewhere, it means that you leave the ground in an airplane. And so he did that in a small airplane with 90 kilograms of mail, we find out later.
所以在那一天呢 on that day 法国人亨利佩凯他起飞 took off 就是起飞，从这个阿拉哈巴德印度的阿拉哈巴德起飞，然后呢 in a small airplane 意思就是他开着一架小飞机，字面上的意思是他乘坐一架小飞机，那其实就是他起飞嘛，然后呢既然是起飞坐在那个飞机上，那就是表示他开了一架小飞机起飞了。
The flight was part of an industrial exhibition in the city. The city is Allahabad in India. They had a special exhibition to show the latest technology and industry and so on. And this Henri Piquet took advantage of the situation to show, hey, look, you know, we can fly planes long distances and deliver important things like airmail.
好，所以 the flight 这一次的飞行 was part of 是什么的一部分呢？是一个 industrial exhibition 工业展览的一部分。那这个是在工业展览是怎么样呢？是 in the city 是在这个城市的工业展览的一部分。
Anyone could send a letter to England on the flight for a fee. So part of the exhibition was like, you too can send an airmail for a small fee.
好 anyone 任何一个人都可以 send a letter to 寄一封信到英国，因为那个时候印度应该还是英国的殖民地。那 on the flight 是坐飞机搭这一个班机可以把你的信送到英国去， on the flight 就特别指这一次的飞行。那 for a fee 就是你要付费，你付一些钱就可以寄信到英国去。
In the end, 6,500 pieces of mail were accepted. So the idea was obviously very, very popular. People wanted to find out, wow, if we send it by air, maybe it'll only take a day or two instead of by land or sea where it could take a week or two.
好，所以 in the end 到最后呢，有6500个 pieces of mail 就是邮件哈，因为 mail 不可以数，所以你要数邮件的话用 pieces of mail。所以有6500个邮件呢 were accepted 被受理哈，被接受了。那因为可能显然有些邮件可能要寄到别的地方去，或者是太远了或怎么样，他们就不受理。那最后受理的是6500个邮件，6500件邮件。
And those 6,500 pieces of mail added up to or amounted to came up to 90 kilograms, which, you know, airplanes of the time were not quite up to the snuff of airplanes we have now. So that was quite a lot for the small plane.
好，这个地方呢 it amounted to 就是总共，它总共加起来to be a certain total 叫做 amount to， 所以总共加起来就是90公斤。那同位语告诉你 quite a lot， 这个不少相当的不少 for the small plane， 对那架小飞机来讲那不少
All the money obtained from the event was donated to the Oxford and Cambridge Boys Hostel. So remember, they charged a fee for each letter. Probably wasn't a great deal of money. And they got money from the event, but they didn't just spend it on themselves. They gave it to, they donated it to the Oxford and Cambridge Boys Hostel. A hostel is something like a hotel, but I have a feeling this is more permanent. A boys' hostel may be a place for boys who don't have any place to live, like an orphanage, something like that.
Or it's almost like a shelter.
Yeah.
Some kind.
Could
Yeah.
could be, yeah.
好，所以呢，这个地方讲到说，所有的这个钱呢 obtained from the event. Obtain 就是 acquire 或者 get. Event 就是这一次的活动。所以呢，这一次活动所得到的所有的钱呢 was donated to 就被捐给谁呢？被捐给这个the Oxford and Cambridge Boys Hostel. 这个是一个由教堂所发起的一个募款活动，是这个其实那个 hostel 在这里其实是类似收容所的意思。
Now, the plane only flew 6 miles and landed on the other side of a river, so it didn't go very far because it was, after all, a PR stunt. If you land, that's the opposite of taking off. You take an airplane back down to the ground.
那这个飞机呢，只不过飞了6英里，然后就降落了，而且降落在哪里呢？ On the other side of a river， 在河的另外一边就降落了，它只飞了6英里。
From there, from the other side of the river, the mail made the rest of the journey to England in the normal way, in the usual way, by land and sea. 骗子
所以呢，他没有一路飞到英国，他飞了6英里就降落了。然后呢 ，from there 就是从他降落的那个地方呢，那这些邮件呢 ，made the rest of the journey 就是完成剩下的路程。to make the rest of the journey 去哪里的路程呢 ？To England。所以他们完成剩下要到英国的路程。那怎么完成的呢？后面一个副词片语告诉你 in the normal way， 以正常的方式，以一般的原本的方式，常见的方式，那就是什么呢？再一个同位语告诉你 by land and sea， 经由 land， by land 就经由陆路，然后 by sea 就是经由海路，所以后面的路都一样，只是前面6英里呢用飞的。
So it didn't go all the way to England by air, but it didn't not use any air.
6 miles and then 600 miles by land and sea.
But it was probably literally the first intentional flight just for mail that was ever done in the world. Like in previous times, I'm sure letters were sent by airplane, but like this was the first intentional, totally for the mail.
Look here,
purpose built
to show that it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stunt.
In the future.
And so each piece of the airmail, the quote airmail, had a stamp that said first aerial post. And aerial means having traveled through the air. And it counts, I guess.
好，所以呢，他说 each piece of the airmail， 这6500个邮件的每一件呢 had a stamp， 就是盖了一个邮戳。那邮戳上面说什么呢？ That said 是 first， 第一个 aerial post， 这个 aerial 就是空中的，这个空运的，空中的意思。所以虽然说它只飞了6英里，但是呢，它也可以说它是第一个航空邮递的邮件。
In fact, King George V was one of the recipients. King George V. Now we have King Charles V. In the United Kingdom. Whenever you see this, no matter what country it comes from, we use the Latin numbers, the Roman numbers that you have to learn, and use the and then DG, the ordinal number. So this is the 5th. If we add an I after this, it becomes 6. Then it would be King George the 6th. Queen Elizabeth the 2nd passed away last year. Queen Elizabeth the 1st was in the 1600s. So it was 400 years after she died before we had another Queen Elizabeth.
And yeah, they just like to repeat the names. It doesn't mean that they're the daughters or anything.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Just need to point that out for those not familiar with this system.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Yeah. Well,
now, King Charles, the current king, was named after Charles, and that guy was beheaded, so I don't know.
好，所以呢，各位要注意这个念法。这个看起来它这里写法就是 King George， 然后后面一个罗马数字5，但是英文要念的时候，你要念 King George the 5th， 要用那个序数the 5th。各位可以就记得这个 King Bruce the 1st， 这样就可以。
last.
You have to be a king first. I
Well,
mean, to be
that can
called
be
this.
managed, I think.
Sure.
好，所以 anyway， 这个第几记得要这样念。好，所以他说乔治5世国王呢 was one of the recipients。recipient 就是收信者，所以其中有信呢就是要寄给乔治5世国王。
And so even though the first air mail flight hardly saved any time, in fact, saved nearly no time on the mail's delivery, it did prove that sending mail by air was possible. Like, check this out. We can put mail in an airplane. Cool.
Yeah.
We do the same thing now with those rockets from Musk and the guy in the Washington Post.
We proved that we can send billionaires up to almost space and bring them back down. They should have skipped the bringing back down part.
And then it can come back and you can reuse it. That's the big news.
Didn't the U.S. prove that in like the 1980s with the space shuttle? Space shuttle.
That's different. The space shuttle cannot go to the moon.
Do you know what's even cooler than those dudes? Some people are setting up a system whereby they use like centripetal force to just slingshot things into the air, because the cost of sending a rocket into the air is so much fuel and so much waste, right? Even if you reuse some of it. But these guys are just slingshotting it into the air. It's not completely finished yet. They're scaling it up, but I really think that they have a shot, at being successful.
Maybe we'll have an article on that in the future.
Those guys, in future, they could possibly do 12 satellites a day, whereas these other guys with rockets can send up one satellite every 12 days. So think about that.
所以这个刚刚这个 Bruce 老师跟 Angela 老师提到了各种现代的科技的发达。好，那例如说我们现在已经可以用火箭把人载到太空，再把它带回来。那 Angela 老师说呢，这个有人现在开始想办法用离心力，好像我们这个甩弹弓一样，好把人这个或者东西甩到太空去，啊，这样听说更节能，而且这个效果也很好。好，那我们来看到这个句子，他说呢，虽然说这个第一次的航空邮件的这样的飞行呢 ，hardly saved any time， 几乎没有省下什么时间。好，在哪方面没有省下什么时间呢 ？On the mail's delivery， 在这个信的寄送上面 ，delivery 就是寄送，在寄信上面几乎没有省下多少时间。但是 it proved that， 它证明了 sending mail by air 这件事情，就是用航空来寄信这件事情呢 ，was possible 是可能的。
As airplane technology improved over the decades after it got better, over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, airmail has become more efficient. And efficient is something you want because it takes less time to do the same or even more work.
好，所以随着 airplane technology 就是飞机的科技 improved 改善 over the decades 几十年来啊，改善或者进步 improved 也可以说是进步。好，所以经过几十年来的进步呢，那我们可以知道 airmail 就是航空邮递呢，已经变成了 more efficient 更加有效率了。
Okay, we have a couple of questions for you. The first is, where was the destination of the first mail delivered by air?
好，第一次航空邮递是要它的目的地是哪里呢？
The destination was England.
它的目的地是英国。
Now, the second question is, why is King George V mentioned in this passage? Like, what does this dude have to do with any of this? He received one of the first air-mailed letters, or letters by air.
好，所以问题是乔治五世为什么在文章里面被提到呢？答案是因为他收到了这第一次航空邮递的一封信，其中一封的至少一封，这个收件者是他。
Okay, that's it for today. We'll be back one more time this month to help you out with your English. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.